many women spend years feeling off before getting a diagnosis. So, what are some of the early warning signs that something autoimmune might be going on?
Yeah, so generally what you will feel is more of a like it's impacting multiple systems in my body. And it's sometimes cyclical or sometimes more like recurring. So maybe you go through a time period where, symptoms are more prevalent and then they kind of subside a little bit and you think you're okay, and then they come back again and then they subside. So just kind of that type of scenario. Um, and generally, like you can't give an explanation to why you feel how you feel. So when you combine that, so if you're kind of feeling just general symptoms throughout your body. They kind of come and go. Can't really explain. Like we know, like if you're like working long hours and there's a lot of stress in your life, like yeah, you're gonna maybe feel fatigued or you're gonna have a little bit of brain fog just because your stress level is so high and you're not giving your body and your system what it needs. So that would be an explanation. So if that's not really the case, and there's not one thing that you can point to, like, oh, this is what's going on, that's probably what's causing my symptoms, then that's definitely has to start getting your mind thinking that an autoimmune process may be going on. So what you really want to look for from a symptom perspective is that cyclical fatigue, especially, in women, because it's going to follow our cycle a little bit more. That's not fixed by sleep. So a lot of times we'll see people that are like, I sleep 8 hours a night, but I'm still fatigued. Like, why am I still so fatigued? And they'll even say, like, my sleep quality is not bad. They,
Hmm.
aren't waking up at night. Maybe they're tracking their sleep score. So they're like, why am I still so tired? So that's definitely one of the signs. A lot of brain fog can be another, difficulty finding words. So just kind of some of that processing in your brain and that cognition. Hair is another one. So hair shedding, I think we hear that a lot from a lot of women.
Yeah.
And brittle nails, cold hands, cold feet, those can all be signs. And then we move to gut health. So bloating, bloating's big. Food
Yeah.
reactions, constipation or diarrhea, so how or swinging from one to the other, potentially some joint stiffness or um, pain kind of along their tendons or muscle pain or just some like moving aches and pains, like, oh, maybe one day, like, I'm really feeling the shoulder pain. I don't know. You probably see people this all the time. And then they like come in like, oh, that's better. But now I have this like knee pain. And then, oh,
Yes.
now I've got this wrist pain. And it just seems to
Yes.
like travel.
Let's talk about how stress, trauma, and even emotional load can contribute to the onset or even flare-ups of autoimmune disease.
Yeah. So your people know, if you've been listening to Lisa or working with her in any capacity, stress, you already know stress is not great for our system.
Yes.
And it impacts something called our HPA axis, so our hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So that's kind of our brain center. And then our adrenals are cortisol and other hormones. So that's what give us life and energy. They're very needed, but we want, again, that delicate balance. And so, um, whenever we have stress, trauma, big emotional loads or things like that, it can dysregulate or throw off that very delicate HPA axis. It impacts our vagus nerve, and so that vagus, again, anyone that's worked with you knows about the vagus nerve and how that controls our autonomic nervous system. So if we're in that fight or flight, like really keyed up, highly anxious, we're running for our life mode or kind of our parasympathetic rest or digest. So chronic stress will impact that vagus nerve, disrupts our sleep, elevates our cortisol, all these things I think you guys have heard. It interrupts our gut function, can cause something called leaky gut. And then that process. So if we've developed that leaky gut, especially, then we really have an increase in inflammation that starts in our system.
Mm.
And specific cells are called mast cells start to produce. So that's what our body produces in response to inflammation. It's a very pro-inflammation response, and then that starts to impact our immune system. And if we already have a little bit of our immune system that's attacking our cells, this is more gasoline on the fire that's
Yeah.
already there. So maybe it was just not a fire. Maybe we were just starting to get a little bit of that like smoke, and a big stressful event or traumatic event happens. It just is like that catalyst to um, kind of either flare up a autoimmune condition or be enough of the trigger to be its onset. So stress isn't a cause of it, but it definitely will give our body a little bit more of a push forward in that direction.
And I'm interested in your input about food sensitivities, but we're getting ready to talk about testing. So I don't know if you want to meld it in with that question.
Yeah, so I think the last one, like a big other root cause and or catalyst is always going to be a large inflammatory event. And so that does bring us kind of into that food sensitivity
Yeah.
because if there is a propensity for an autoimmune disease to show up in somebody's system, or they do have a diagnosed autoimmune disease and they're not flared up, what is always either going to trigger or flare that is going to be that spike in inflammation. So, if we know ahead of time that we have this process that's going on, we really need to be finding out what triggers inflammation. And food can be a huge trigger of inflammation. So can
Yep.
injury. So it really just depends. I know several people personally, like injury is actually what triggered their autoimmune disease to finally show up.
Mm-hmm.
It was one, he had a labral tear. Wasn't the tear itself, but it was after his surgery and in his rehab process that was enough of a inflammatory process in his system that's what pushed him over the edge. Another individual, it was actually a arm fracture was enough. And so we really want to be able to start to identify what these inflammatory processes are and which ones can we modify. Obviously, we can't prevent an injury from happening all of the time if it's an accident, but um, some injuries we can prevent. Just being
Yeah.
careful, and making sure we're in good health. And yeah, so that definitely brings us to food sensitivity. So testing that helps. Um, so I've done food sensitivity testing, you've done food sensitivity testing, so you
Yes.
give me some of your input on this.
Yes.
But there is one that I like in particular that really looks more at our body's cytokine or true inflammatory response to foods and chemicals. And so oftentimes what we find is that if we can start to remove some of those high inflammatory causing foods and chemicals from our system, we can also then allow our gut to heal. And then as our gut heals, we actually won't be as reactive to some of those more sensitive foods and chemicals. And so that helps to ultimately lower the inflammation in our system as our gut has been allowed to heal. So I always recommend if anyone comes in and we've done any lab work, which we'll kind of get to some of those here in a second, but if I see any autoimmune antibodies being created at all, usually food sensitivity testing is like my number one thing to do with those
Yeah.
folks.